Welcome back to the deep dive. If you are joining us today, you might want to find a comfortable spot, maybe grab a notebook.
Yeah, definitely grab a notebook for this one.
Because we are about to tackle a text that I think acts like, well, it is like a theological centrifuge.
Oh, I like that.
It spins you around so fast you almost lose your bearings. But when it finally stops, everything has been separated into its rawest, most truthful components.
That is a very vivid image.
Yeah.
And honestly, it is entirely accurate for where we are going today.
Yeah.
It really is a disorienting chapter in the best possible way.
We are diving headfirst into 2 Kings chapter 6. And when I say disorienting, I mean we are dealing with a narrative arc that is practically giving me whiplash.
Right, the contrast is just huge.
Exactly. We start with a story about a guy losing a borrowed tool in a river, a very mundane Monday morning kind of problem, you know.
Absolutely mundane.
And before you know it, we are staring at invisible armies of fire, international espionage, and then without any warning at all, we drop into the absolute sheer horror of a siege and, well, cannibalism.
It is a masterpiece of contrasts. You have the domestic, the military, the spiritual, and the grotesque all happening within about 30 verses.
It is a lot to take in.
It really is. It is not just a story. It is a cross-section of human existence.
So our mission today is to map this terrain for you. We aren't just reading the story. We want to do a forensic analysis, a verse-by-verse deep dive, unpacking the physical layers, sure, but really getting into the spiritual and psychological layers that the text is presenting.
And we have great source material for this.
Yeah.
Detailed commentaries, historical context, theological breakdowns of the King James text.
Right. We've got the archaeological data on the Iron Age, the Hebrew syntax, and the military history of the ancient Near East.
And to really get it, to understand what is happening, you have to understand the stakes.
Yeah.
This is not a fairy tale.
No, not at all.
This is a historical document cataloging the disintegration of a nation.
So set the stage for us. Before we get to the floating iron or the invisible chariots, where are we in history? What does the map actually look like?
Well, we are in the northern kingdom of Israel. The timeline is roughly the mid-9th century BC, so somewhere between 850 and 840 BC.
Okay, so the divided monarchy period.
Exactly. After Solomon, the kingdom split. In the south, you have Judah with its capital in Jerusalem. In the north, you have Israel with its capital in Samaria.
And who is sitting on the throne in the north at this time?
Most likely Jehoram. He's the son of Ahab and Jezebel.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he has, let us call it complex family baggage.
To put it mildly, Ahab and Jezebel were the architects of state-sponsored Baal worship.
Right, they were brutal.
They're the ones who tried to exterminate the prophets of Yahweh. Now, Jehoram is a bit of an enigma.
How so?
Well, he is not quite as aggressive as his parents in persecuting the prophets. He actually removed the pillar of Baal, technically, but he is certainly not a righteous man.
He is more as a pragmatist.
Exactly. He tolerates Elisha the prophet, but he does not submit to Yahweh. He wants the benefits of God's power without the constraints of God's law.
That sounds incredibly familiar, even today, and on the other side of the border.
The geopolitical threat is Aram, which is modern-day Syria. The king is Ben-Hadad II. Israel and Syria are locked in this cycle of intermittent warfare.
So it is not always full-scale invasion.
Right. Sometimes it is guerrilla raids, sometimes it is uneasy truces. Think of it as a Cold War turning hot every so often. It is a time of extreme high anxiety.
So you have a wicked king, a looming war, and national apostasy. You would expect the religious community to be shrinking, right? Hiding in caves.
You really would. But that brings us to part 1, the miracle of the floating axe head. This covers verses 1 through 7. Look at verse 1. The sons of the prophets come to Elisha.
The sons of the prophets, that always sounds like a motorcycle gang to me.
It does, doesn't it? But think of them more like a guild or a theological seminary. These are the students under the mentorship of the prophets.
Right.
And they approach Elisha with a very practical problem.
Yeah, verse 1 says, "Behold now, the place where we dwell with thee is too strait for us."
Too straight. That is the King James phrasing. In modern English, we would say it is too tight or too cramped. They are squeezing into this facility.
Which is actually a fascinating detail right off the bat when you think about it.
It is. Despite the national apostasy, despite the king and the nation turning away from God, this faithful remnant, this school of prophets, is growing.
They are bursting at the seams.
Exactly. It tells us that even in the darkest cultural moments, God is always building his church. The darkness actually highlights the light, and people are drawn to it.
That is such a counterintuitive point. You would expect the faithful to be shrinking in a time like that. So what is their plan? Do they launch a capital campaign to buy a new building?
No, they don't. Look at verse 2. Let us go, we pray thee, unto Jordan, and take there every man a beam, and let us make us a place there where we may dwell.
So they are going to build it themselves.
Yes, and I love the social analysis here. These aren't ascetics withdrawing from the world to meditate on a mountaintop. They are asking for a handout from the king.
They are active laborers.
They exemplify industry, humility, and a desire to build. They are going down to the Jordan River, to the thicket area to chop down timber themselves.
And in verses 3 and 4, they invite Elisha to come along. One of the disciples basically says, "Be content, I pray thee, go with thy servants."
And Elisha simply says, I will go.
Which tells us something profound about his leadership style, doesn't it?
It absolutely destroys the ivory tower leadership model. He is the most powerful man in the region, spiritually speaking.
Right, he crowns kings. He commands fire.
But he is willing to go on a camping trip and watch his students chop wood. He is accessible. He participates in the manual labor of his students. He walks with them.
So they get to the Jordan, they start chopping wood, and then in verse 5, we hit the crisis. But as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water. And the guy cries out, "Alas, master, for it was borrowed."
Now, to you listening today, this might sound like a minor inconvenience. You drop your tool, you go to the hardware store and buy a new one.
Right. Context is key here.
We really have to apply some economic analysis. This is not 2024. We are in the Iron Age 2 period.
Iron technology was basically the Silicon chip of its day, wasn't it?
It was. It was relatively new technology for Israel. For a long time, the Philistines had a monopoly on iron smithing, specifically to keep Israel weak.
So they couldn't make weapons.
Exactly. By Elisha's day, it was more common, but still rare and very, very expensive.
So this is not just a lost hammer.
No, this is a lost high-value asset.
Yeah.
But the text specifies the pivot point for it was borrowed.
Meaning he didn't own it.
Right. This implies the student did not have the capital to own one. He leveraged his reputation to borrow this expensive item. Losing a borrowed iron tool meant incurring a massive debt.
And in that culture, if you cannot pay a debt,
You don't file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. You sell yourself or your children into bond slavery.
wow.
The Mosaic Law allowed for this, working off debt as a servant. So when he cries alas, it's not just frustration over a lost tool. It is stark fear.
He is envisioning his freedom slipping away.
He is terrified of failing the person who lent it to him, and he's terrified of the financial ruin that comes next.
That raises the stakes significantly. It is about the man's life, his future. So verses 6 and 7, Elisha steps in. He asks where it fell. The man shows him the place. And then Elisha does something odd. He cuts a stick and throws it in.
And the text says, the iron did swim.
The iron did swim. I just love the King James phrasing there. It is poetic. But let us talk physics for a second.
Let's do it.
Iron density is about 7.87 grams per cubic centimeter. Water is 1 gram per cubic centimeter.
Meaning iron sinks. Always. Gravity and density demand it. That is a fundamental law of our physical universe.
So for the iron to float,
God has to actively suspend or override the laws of physics. He has to alter the gravitational constant locally, or change the density of the water, or hydrodynamically lift the solid metal.
but why? Why break the fundamental laws of physics for a simple axe head?
That is the beauty of this story. It shows God cares about the small things. He isn't just the God of cosmic wars or national judgments. He is the God of the borrowed tool.
He cares about your debts, your daily anxieties, your reputation.
Exactly. Now, the commentaries mention some powerful typology here. A lot of scholars see a metaphor in the stick and the iron.
Yes, this is a classic allegorical reading dating all the way back to the early church fathers. The stick, or the wood, is often seen as a type of the cross,
Right.
and the sinking iron represents sinful, heavy humanity. We are sinking into the murky waters of the world, weighed down by the debt of sin that we cannot possibly pay. We are completely lost.
I see where this is going, and it is beautiful. Elisha applies the wood to the water, just as God applies the cross to the world, and the heavy, sunken thing rises. It is a profound picture of resurrection and redemption. The wood applied to the water raises the sunken life. It restores what was lost.
That is amazing. And yet, there is a vital human element in verse 7. Elisha doesn't just levitate the axe head back onto the handle for the guy.
Correct. Elisha says, take it up to thee. The man had to physically put out his hand and grab it.
It is a picture of human responsibility cooperating with grace.
Precisely. The miracle is provided. The salvation is there floating on the surface. But you have to reach out and take hold of it. You have to appropriate the grace yourself.
That is such a rich way to start the chapter. But then we move from this intimate, personal miracle at the river to part 2, the prophet versus the king of Syria. This is verses 8 through 14. We are shifting gears from forestry to international espionage.
We really are. The camera angle shifts dramatically. We are now in the palace of Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, and he is furious.
Verse 8 says he took counsel with his servants, saying, "In such and such a place shall be my camp. This is operational security."
Yes, these are classified maneuvers. He is planning ambushes to capture Jehoram or to raid specific vulnerable territories.
But he keeps hitting a brick wall. Verses 9 and 10, Elisha keeps warning the king of Israel. He says, "Don't go here. The Syrians are hiding there."
And the text says this happened not once nor twice. It is a repeated pattern.
It is like Israel has a live satellite feed of the Syrian war room.
It is better than satellite. It is divine intelligence. And the implication is that prophetic insight acts as a superior strategic defense initiative.
God is protecting the nation of Israel. And remember, he is protecting a wicked king, Jehoram, for the sake of the nation itself.
That is grace again. God is preserving his people despite their terrible leadership.
So, verses 11 and 12, the Syrian king is losing his mind. He is entirely paranoid. He is convinced he has a high-level mole.
He says, "Will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel?" The text says he is sore troubled. He is looking for a political explanation for a spiritual problem. He naturally assumes treason.
And one of his servants has to break the news to him. He says, "It is not us, boss. It is Elisha."
That servant's line is an all-time classic. "None, my lord, O king, but Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber."
The bedchamber.
The most private, secure room in the entire palace, the place where you whisper to your spouse in the dark. The servant is basically saying, there is no security clearance high enough to block this guy's God.
It perfectly underscores the theological attribute of omniscience.
Absolutely. God knows secrets. There is no such thing as a classified conversation before God.
Psalm 139 comes to mind. "Thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thought afar off."
Spot on. So the king of Syria decides, okay, if the prophet is the problem, I will take out the prophet. Verses 13 and 14. He finds out Elisha is staying in Dothan.
Dothan, the place of two wells. Historically, this is interesting because Dothan is where Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers centuries earlier.
Right, it has a dark history of betrayal and trauma.
And the king sends, and I quote, "horses, chariots, and a great host."
To capture one single man
It seems like comical overkill.
is absolute overkill. But it shows the enemy's flawed logic. He thinks he can overwhelm spiritual power with overwhelming physical force.
It is spiritual warfare manifesting as a military siege.
Yes, he targets the source of the word of God. The enemy knows that if you silence the prophet, you blind the entire nation.
Which perfectly leads us to part 3. Spiritual vision at Dothan, verses 15 through 17. This is arguably one of the most famous sequences in the entire Bible.
It starts with sheer panic, verse 15. Elisha's servant wakes up early, goes outside maybe to get water or start the breakfast fire, and he looks up. The city is completely surrounded by the Syrian army.
And he cries out, "Alas, my master, how shall we do?"
Notice the linguistic parallel here. The guy with the sunken axe head cried, "Alas, master." The servant here cries, "Alas, master."
It is the universal cry of a person looking at a terrifying physical reality and seeing absolutely no way out.
Exactly. His fear is based entirely on what is visible. He is a strict empiricist in this moment.
And Elisha's response in verse 16 is just ice cold, completely calm. "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them."
The math of faith.
It sounds totally crazy if you are just looking at the head count. 2 guys versus a great host.
Physical arithmetic says 2 versus 10,000. Spiritual arithmetic says the infinite God versus 10,000. Elisha isn't denying the Syrian army exists. He is just saying they are hopelessly outnumbered.
And then verse 17, the prayer. Elisha does not pray for God to send help.
That is the key theological distinction here. He prays, "Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see."
He doesn't ask God to create an army. He asks God to reveal the army that is already standing right there.
And suddenly the servant sees that the mountain is full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha.
These chariots of fire connect us right back to 2 Kings chapter 2 with Elijah's departure into heaven. It is the heavenly host.
The Tzevet. These aren't cute, chubby cherubs playing harps. These are terrifying warrior spirits.
So for you listening right now, what is the analysis here regarding these not seen, behind-the-scenes battles?
The analysis is that the spiritual reality is actually more real than the physical reality. The angels were present long before the servant saw them. His fear was a product of his spiritual blindness, not his physical danger.
The encouragement here is Psalm 34.7. The angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them.
It is a profound elaboration on spiritual warfare. Behind every earthly conflict, behind the things stressing you out, there are spiritual forces at play. Like Ephesians 6.2 tells us, we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
So we have the servant seeing the invisible army. Now in part 4, the tables turn completely on the Syrians, verses 18 through 23.
The Syrian army advances down toward Elisha, and Elisha prays again. But this time, not for sight. He prays for blindness.
He prays to strike the Syrians with blindness.
The Hebrew word used here is sanvrim. It is a very rare word in the text. It is actually the exact same word used in Genesis 19 when the angel struck the men of Sodom outside Lot's house.
So does it mean their eyes went pitch black?
Not necessarily. It implies a mental confusion, a severe dazzlement or illusion. They can physically see, but they cannot perceive reality correctly. They become highly docile and strangely suggestible.
That makes total sense because Elisha then walks right out to them in verses 19 and 20 and basically says, hey guys, this isn't the way. Follow me. I will take you to the man you are looking for.
It is a trap of epic proportions. He leads the entire enemy army on a 12-mile hike south.
Straight into Samaria.
Yes, the heavily fortified capital city of their enemy. Right into the heart of the fortress.
And once they are inside the walls, Elisha prays, Lord, open the eyes of these men that they may see. And their confusion lifts, they look around, and they are surrounded by the armies of Israel.
The archers are on the walls aiming down at them. The king of Israel is standing right in front of them.
Talk about a psychological shock. The hunters have instantly become the captured.
So naturally, King Jehoram sees this massive enemy army delivered into his lap and gets extremely excited. Verse 21, he asks Elisha, my father, shall I smite them? Shall I smite them? He repeats it. He's eager for blood.
He wants violence. He sees this as a massive military victory that fell from the sky.
But notice the psychological shift. He suddenly calls Elisha, my father.
Right. He is suddenly very respectful because Elisha just handed him a major win.
But Elisha immediately commands mercy. He says, thou shalt not smite them.
He asks the king, would you kill those whom you have taken captive with your sword and with your bow?
He is appealing to the ancient laws of war. Even standard military captives get some basic rights. But these men are not Jehoram's captives. They are God's captives.
So Elisha tells the king to set bread and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master.
This is a profound political and social analysis here. Elisha is introducing the concept of treating prisoners of war with dignity, centuries before the Geneva Convention ever existed.
It perfectly connects to Romans 12.20. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink.
It is the triumph of mercy over judgment. And verse 23 says they prepared great provision for them. It wasn't just a meager ration of bread and water, it was a massive banquet.
And look at the result in verse 23. So the bands of Syria came no more into the land of Israel. Mercy accomplished what war could not.
The guerrilla raids stopped because the cycle of violence was violently interrupted by a feast. It effectively shamed them into peace.
That feels like a wonderful, happy ending. The axe head is back, the army is fed and sent home, peace in the valley. But the chapter doesn't end there.
No. The Bible is brutally honest. It does not stop at the happy ending.
Then we get to part 5, verses 24 and 25, and the mood shifts drastically.
It really does. Verse 24 starts with, and it came to pass after this, we don't know exactly how long after, but Ben-Hadad returns. And this time, it is not just small raiding bands. It is a full, massive siege army.
And they besiege Samaria.
A siege is a horrific, drawn-out form of warfare. You surround the city walls, you cut off all supply lines, and you simply wait for the population to starve to death.
It deliberately targets the civilians, the old, the young, the vulnerable.
And verse 25 vividly describes the economy of despair inside the walls. The hyperinflation is insane.
It gives us specific market prices. A donkey's head is sold for 80 shekels of silver.
Let us break that down for you listening. First, a donkey is an unclean animal for Israelites. According to Levitical law, they aren't supposed to eat it at all.
And the head. There's practically no meat on a donkey's head. It is mostly bone and skull.
Exactly. It highlights their religious desperation, being forced to eat the unclean, and their total economic collapse. 80 shekels is a massive amount of money. We're talking years of wages for a peasant, just for a skull.
And then there's the fourth part of a cap of dove's dung for 5 pieces of silver.
Dove's dung.
Are we talking literal animal droppings here?
Scholars heavily debate this. Some botanists and linguists think dove's dung is a colloquial name for a type of wild onion or bulb, something like the Star of Bethlehem plant.
Okay, that makes slightly more sense as food.
But others argue that, given the horrific context of the donkey head, it might be literal dung. People might have been buying it to use as fuel to cook whatever scraps they had, or tragically buying it to pick through for undigested seeds to eat.
That is deeply disturbing.
Either way, it paints a picture of total, utter destitution. Money has become completely useless because there's simply no bread to buy.
And if that wasn't bad enough, we move to part 6, the horror of sin, verses 26 through 30. I have to say, this is the hardest part of the chapter to read.
It is stomach-turning. The king is walking upon the wall inspecting the military defenses, and a woman cries out to him, "Help, my lord, O king."
And the king's response in verse 27 is so incredibly cynical. He says, "If the Lord do not help thee, whence shall I help thee? Out of the barn floor or out of the winepress?"
He is openly admitting his own impotence as a leader, but he is also revealing his dark spiritual state. It is pure despair, not faith. He is essentially saying, God has abandoned us, the barns are empty, and I have absolutely nothing for you. Stop bothering me.
But then he pauses and asks her what is wrong. And verses 20 and 29, she tells him,
This is the cannibalism pact. 2 women agree to eat their own sons to survive.
The text says, "Give thy son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow."
And they did. They boiled and ate the first son. It is unthinkable.
But on the second day, the second woman hid her son.
And the first woman is appealing to the king for what? Legal justice.
That is the true horror of it. She is furious because the other woman broke the contract.
She isn't crying out for forgiveness from God. She isn't crying out in repentance for what she did to her baby. She feels legally cheated because she didn't get her fair share of the cannibalism.
It is a complete and total moral collapse of society.
It is the disintegration of the maternal bond, which is usually the strongest, most sacrificial bond in human nature. But we have to analyze this theologically. This is not just random suffering.
No, it is not. This is the direct prophetic fulfillment of the curses listed in the law.
Yes, Deuteronomy 28.53 through 57 and Leviticus 26 explicitly warned Israel centuries earlier. God told them that if they forsook him and pursued idols, the enemy's sieges would be so severe that they would literally eat the fruit of their own bodies, the flesh of their sons and daughters.
So this horrific scene is the ultimate result of national apostasy.
It is sin illustrated. Sin ultimately creates a dog-eat-dog world, literally in this case. The final result of abandoning God is complete dehumanization.
Because when you remove the image of God from your worldview, people just become meat. They just become calories to be consumed.
Precisely. The king hears this woman's complaint in verse 30, and he is so devastated he rends his clothes, he tears his royal robes.
And we see a shocking reveal here. As the robes tear, the people on the wall see that he was wearing sackcloth underneath upon his flesh.
Sackcloth is the traditional garment of mourning and repentance.
Right. So psychologically, this is fascinating. He is suffering. He's clearly religious. He is mourning the state of his city, but he is not repenting.
That is the critical distinction. He is doing the outward ritual of sorrow without the inward relationship of submission to God. Yeah. He is wearing the shirt, but he hasn't changed his heart.
Which becomes painfully obvious in part 7, the blame game, verses 31 through 33. Because who does the king blame for this woman eating her baby?
He blames Elisha, verse 31. He swears an oath to behead Elisha that very day. God do so, and more also to me, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall stand on him this day.
But why Elisha? What did Elisha do to cause the famine?
Nothing. That is exactly the point. It is the classic scapegoat mechanism. Instead of blaming the sin and idolatry that actually caused the siege, instead of blaming himself as the spiritual and political leader of the nation, he blames the messenger of God.
He probably thinks Elisha has the power to stop this. He made the iron float. He blinded the Syrian army before. If he isn't stopping this famine right now, it is his fault we are suffering.
It is twisted logic. So he sends an executioner to kill him. Verse 32. Elisha is sitting quietly in his house, consulting with the elders of the city.
And once again, that divine intel kicks in. Before the executioner even arrives, Elisha says to the elders, "See ye how this son of a murderer hath sent to take away mine head."
Son of a murderer. That is a direct shot at King Ahab, Jehoram's father, who murdered Naboth for his vineyard.
It is. Elisha sees the family resemblance coming out. He tells the elders to look at the door and hold the door fast against the messenger.
And then the king himself following right behind his messenger, arrives in verse 33 and delivers this chilling ultimatum. He says, "Behold, this evil is of the Lord. What should I wait for the Lord any longer?"
Let us really unpack that statement. This evil is of the Lord.
He is acknowledging God's sovereignty. He knows deep down that God caused the siege as judgment.
Yes, but it is a sovereignty of pure despair. He believes God is the cause, but he actively refuses to believe God is the solution. He is saying, God did this to us, so why should I trust him to fix it? I am done waiting on Yahweh.
It is a massive cliffhanger. The chapter ends on this note of total, suffocating hopelessness. The axe had floated, the army was blinded, but now they are starving to death, eating their own children, and the king has formally given up on God.
It perfectly sets the stage for chapter 7, where the miraculous deliverance finally comes. But chapter 6 forces us to sit in the tension. It forces us to look unblinkingly at the reality of a world that has rejected grace.
It does. It is heavy, but it is necessary.
So let us move into our deep dive analysis segment. We have walked through the verses chronologically. Let us synthesize this for you listening. Talk to me about the people, places, and things breakdown.
Well, looking at the people, you have these stark archetypes. Elisha functions clearly as a Christ type, a mediator.
He feeds the enemies, he raises the lost item from the depths, he constantly intercedes for the blind.
Exactly. And then you have Jehoram. He's the double-minded leader. He listens to Elisha sometimes, he wears the sackcloth in secret, but when the pressure hits its peak, his first instinct is to murder the prophet.
He wants the benefits of God without the submission to God. He is the anti-leader.
And what about the servant?
He is the fearful believer. He represents all of us when we look at the terrifying news cycle instead of the good news. He needs his eyes opened.
Spot on. And looking at the places, the Jordan River is a place of transition and miraculous restoration. Dothan is the place of revelation, where the invisible spiritual realm becomes visible, and Samaria becomes the place of harsh judgment.
We spent a good amount of time on the axe head earlier. Why do you think that specific miracle sticks with people so much?
I think because it's just so universally relatable. Most of us aren't kings facing military sieges, but we all have lost tools. We have finances, jobs, small daily worries that feel like they're going to sink us and ruin our lives.
It is the God of the mundane.
Precisely. The theological point is that God effortlessly transcends the physics of our universe to restore the cutting edge of a believer's life and ministry. If you have lost your effectiveness, your joy, your edge, God can make it float again.
Let us talk about the political and psychological analysis. You mentioned soft power earlier when discussing the feast.
Yes. The contrast between the king frantically wanting to smite them and Elisha calmly saying, "Feed them," is massive. Politically, the divine intelligence Elisha provided was vastly superior to military force.
But psychologically, the feast was more effective than the sword. It completely de-escalated a massive international conflict. It proves that mercy can be a highly effective weapon.
But then, unfortunately, you have the psychology of the siege.
That is the dark side of human nature.
It shows the absolute fragility of civilization. When resources vanish, the social contract breaks down immediately. The king's cognitive dissonance, wearing sackcloth but planning a murder, shows how extreme stress splits a person who isn't grounded in truth.
And the allegorical aspects. We touched on the wood and the cross.
Right, but also look deeply at the blindness and sight theme running through the chapter. It is a powerful metaphor for the gospel, like 2 Corinthians 4.4 talks about.
The God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not.
Exactly. The world, represented by the Syrian army, thinks it sees perfectly, but it is actually blind to reality. The believer, represented by the servant, thinks he is alone and doomed, but he just needs his spiritual eyes open to see the truth.
The chariots of fire.
They represent divine protection. But allegorically, they remind us that the visible, physical world is entirely subservient to the invisible God.
So what about modern application? How does a gritty story about 850 BC relate to us now as individuals, families, and culturally?
I think it hits on three distinct levels. Individually, it is the axe head. God deeply cares about your debt, your lost job, your mistakes. Don't be afraid to take the small things to him.
And on a family level?
The siege is a stark warning. Extreme external pressure, whether it's financial ruin, cultural shifts, or health crises, can destroy internal family bonds if we aren't careful. We have to fiercely guard against the cannibalism of turning on each other when life gets hard.
That is a great point. Stress makes us attack the people closest to us, and nationally.
It is a profound warning about abandoning a nation's spiritual foundations. The horror of Samaria didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a long, slow drift away from the covenant.
When a nation eats its own future, whether metaphorically or, in this horrific case, literally, it is a glaring sign of deep spiritual decay. Finally, let us talk about mind renewal. If someone listening right now is feeling like that servant at Dothan, surrounded, outnumbered, panicked, what do they do?
The action step is to pray your eyes open. When you are anxious, you're usually fixated entirely on the physical threat. You need to actively ask God to show you the spiritual reality behind it.
They that be with us are more than they that be with them.
That should be the mantra for the believer. Cast your cares on him, like 1 Peter 5.7 says. And also, looking at Elisha's example with the blinded army, treat your enemies with grace. It confuses the enemy, and it deeply honors God.
It is fascinating how we started this deep dive with a guy worried about a borrowed tool and ended up dealing with the fate of entire nations.
That is the rich texture of Scripture. It covers the whole spectrum of human experience.
We have gone from the floating iron to the chariots of fire, through the blinded army and into the starving city.
It is a wild journey, from faith to fear and hopefully back to faith again.
As we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final provocative thought for you to mull over. We saw the servant's eyes open to see the chariots of fire. We saw the Syrian army's eyes open to see they were captured. We saw the king's eyes. Well, he saw the devastation, but he completely refused to see the solution.
He chose blindness in the end.
So the question for you is, what are you currently blind to? Where in your life are you staring at the Syrian army, paralyzed by fear and completely missing the chariots of fire surrounding you?
That is the ultimate question of the chapter.
We encourage you to examine your own blindness. Ask God to open your eyes to his provision and his protection, even if you feel like you're in the middle of a siege right now. Thanks for diving deep with us.